Alright, YouTube. Hello, welcome back to Raging Loop for the final extra story. It's time for some sheep lore? Maybe even some Mato lore. But let's see. This is a documentary. Sheep versus stack of reports. One's dream is another's reality. An entity viewing everything from outside the story aims to recap the incident from another viewpoint and tie up loose ends. Fair enough. I want to see her live reaction to Meiko eating the Tsuchidumo. Report, writer Mitsuji Misamine, date. When's the 8th? Is that September? Yeah, September 21st, 2003. Summary, I somehow resolved it. The end. Classic. I don't think that's gonna fly though. That's a report.
夏休みの宿題は終わったかしら？
見りゃわかるだろっつんすよ。こんなもん書くとか柄でもねえのに。
権利には義務が伴う。教会はメンバーに
The
対して
church.
その原則の徹底遵守を求めるの。
わかってるよ。ジンクス的活動に関しては報告と連帯しての隠蔽だったか。だからって向き不向きが覆るわけでもねえってことっすよ。
本当に夏休みのノリね。慣れれば大したことないわよ。
慣れるためにまずこれどうにかしねえといけねえっしょ。これどうにかするには慣れがいるっしょ。
あなたがめんどくさがってるの。突き詰めれば元彼にコンタクト取るかどうか。
It was a really lucky break, honestly.
図星か。
いや、それもあるけど、やっぱ文とか報告とか書くのも読むのも苦手っすよ。
そうね。私が頑張って作った事前報告書もあまり読んでなかったみたいだしね。
Digging deep a little?
すんません。
あなたを心配してるの。入ったばかりで随分の重に背負わされて
So
るの。
she's a newbie sheep too, man. They really sent a newbie sheep for a country-ending crisis, potentially.
絶対に確保しとくべきなんだから。
そうっすね。反省してます。
はあ、ちょっとコーヒー入れてくるわ。その後ちょっと見てあげる。
いや、そんな悪いっすよ。
遠慮しないで。自助努力が推奨されるとはいえ、無理難題で苦しめるのはうちの本分じゃないんだから。あなたのお目付け役として必要な助けはするつもり。じゃ、待っててね。
After her blindingly white superior left, Mitsuji Misame let out a deliberately loud sigh. Why is it white in quotation? She expected grumbling would make a difference in an organization like this, but it appeared to have no effect. In actuality, as a member of their active force, she had plenty of experience with recon and reports. It wasn't her lack of literary talent or her ex-boyfriend Haraki Fusaishi, or whatever his real name was, that was the problem. It was figuring out how to write the report while keeping her power hidden. Her power hidden? Do they not know? Mitsuji Misamine was the sheep. Or rather, Mitsuji Misamine was a name she'd simply given to herself as a play on Hitsuji, or sheep. Would have never guessed. In reality, her true name was simply Sheep. As the name indicated, she lived in a very peculiar environment until recently. Though her current environment was pretty peculiar on its own, after all, normal people were completely unaware of the church. But the sheep's existence was heretical even to them, so they don't know she's the sheep. Wait, that's interesting. I thought this was like an organization that was like all about this stuff, but so they don't even know she's sheeping it up. So she needed to hide her true nature even within the already concealed church. Okay, then how the heck do you even write a report then? That is actually kind of crazy. She no they had unnatural powers. Here, unnatural powers refer to the things that would be generally considered superpowers or magic. Supernatural powers right out of the realm of fiction. Those powers thought only to exist in fantasy did in fact actually exist, in a sense, anyway. These superpowers, assumed to exist in a certain sense, were known by many different names. From the perspective of the church, they were called jinxes. The church claimed that jinxes were superpowers born of beings isolated from human socialization. It is hard to understand when written like this, so the church often explained using a cult and a Rain Man as an example. The fuck's a Rain Man? There's a man who seemingly brought rain to any event he participated in. Okay, literally a Rain Man. This left an impression on that group, who began treating him as a genuine rain bringer. A cult showcased superpowers within itself until the cult was exposed from the outside. These superpowers were treated as the real deal, even if they were rules that defied common sense and accepted science. There were cases where those separated from human relations could adopt those rules. Therefore, jinxes were those superpowers that existed via this agreement to abandon common sense, also known as a contract. This didn't mean that jinxes were a mere game of make-believe. Rather, jinxes were a definitive phenomenon, and threat to the ones who'd executed a contract. But as a result of their nature, jinxes cannot be scientifically proven or debunked. In the first place, it was inherent to jinxes that people who want to prove them themselves got repelled from human relations at the very earliest stage. Not to lie, this is some heavy lore, and it's going over my head a little bit. That was why the church advocated for separating the events of the world of jinxes from normal society, resolving them and covering them up. Yeah, okay, that's what the organization does. This mindset was incompatible with the congregation, who called for harmony between jinxes and normal humans, and the parliament, who wished to rule peacefully using jinxes. Just name drop two new organizations, man. I wonder if like Deathloop is gonna have like all this. Like, is this actually gonna be like, is this greater world building, or is it like just some tacked on stuff that will never be relevant? That was why the academia, whose goal was to study what jinxes were and discuss them, were the dominant faction. There are many passing pre-existing religious fundamentalists and destructive ideology groups that oppose the four. Jinx society was spread all across the globe, their numbers said to be in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands. And naturally, due to their nature of being isolated relationships, there were millions out there that remained undiscovered by jinx society. This world did not adhere to common sense as well as people thought it did, an opinion shared by those who knew about jinxes. Jinxes could include any unusual abilities as long as those who know about them acknowledge them. From magical abilities out of storybooks like breathing fire and shooting lightning, to showing illusions and altering reality, the possibilities were limitless. Generally, it was believed that the less a person adhered to common sense, the more absurd jinxes they could acknowledge, or be acknowledged by. Therefore, there was a trend of describing jinxes with the simple phrase, superpowers born from twisted personalities. Surprised Haraki doesn't have a jinx then? It's pretty twisted. Or even old wolf guy. Unless his immunity to God is a jinx, or was a jinx, I guess, since he's dead. When put that way, Mitsuji believed that as long as others were as twisted as her, it wasn't strange for them to have those powers. It wasn't just her, it was them. Most of them had been forced to scatter, and she was sure the majority of them had been killed. She had been lucky, that or clever, for she had managed to survive not by fighting but by choosing to flee. Thus she needed to keep giving her all. so she could survive, so she could prolong her future, her fortune, not future. The moment she reached out to her keyboard, she felt a pair of hands from behind gently overlap her own. She thought her heart was going to stop. She hadn't felt that presence at all. White hands, long white sleeves, the superior of ambiguous age she had just been speaking with. The woman's fingers moved, making Mitsuji type the following words like a puppet master. Summary. I, Mitsuji Misamine, a survivor of the Salvation Pasture Project, prevented a disaster of biblical proportions. Hold on. She's from the pasture? I mean, it made sense since she's a sheep, but hold on. Also, I need the log. Send me back to go way back. Congregation Parliament. Never mind.
心配しないで。
She knows? A stifled voice caressed her neck.
気づいているのは多分私だけ。あるいは私のように
Then how doesn't she doesn't recognize Meiko. And it sounds like the project ended, but maybe the project didn't end, and Meiko's like a newer recruit or something. Because they're from the same place. But it couldn't be the same time, otherwise she would have noticed.
もちろんこんなものは提出しない。大丈夫。ただし私には全てを話してちょうだい。
どこで気づいたっていうか、守るとか笑わせやがる。てめえら教会は学会の殺処分を黙認しやがっただろうが。保護と隠蔽の大義はどこ行ったんだよ。
あなたを守るだけで精一杯だった。それだけ家畜のインパクトは大きいのよ。
Addo.
組織だっては守れないほどにね。
ああ、そうだろうな。しかしなおさら俺があんたらを信用できねえとは想像がつかねえか。
ええ、信用はしない方がいいわ。私だってあなたのことが大っぴらになるようなことになればかばいはしないから。さも知らなかったかのように羊を見つけたと言って追い立てる側に回るでしょうね。まあショックのあまり手が滑るとか何かを見落とすとかはするかもしれないけど。
それやこれや口に出していいのかよ。
上の監視手段は眠らせてきた。ここは安全よ。
何者なんだよあんた。
教会もそれなりに含まれんよ。そこで生き延びるためにはいろいろ知っておかないと。
そうまでしてくれる理由は？
It is pretty surprising, like how deep the lore, like the world building lore is to the series, when it was like so contained.
家畜の能力の優位
And then we'll see if any of it plays out in Deathloop. I gotta feel like if they're dropping all this Mitsuji stuff, and obviously we're not gonna have a huge revelation from this, it's probably gonna be prevalent in Deathloop. Now let me quickly read this again.
ああ、足りねえ。そんな理由でいいなら虐殺なんて起きなかったはずだ。
あなたは政治が分かってない。核兵器は加戦するから意味があるの。
Now she understood. The Taro, who knew only great misfortune and therefore possessed extremely powerful jinxes, easily numbered over 100, including the actual candidates. If they had been carelessly scattered, there was a risk of an all-out war, but there was also a chance that their threat level would fade if they grew obsolete. They could function as a threat precisely because there were so few survivors. As such, they had been called until there was a select few left alive.
ヘドが出るな。
繰り返すけど、そこまでしないと、あなたをここまで連れてくることもできなかった。世界の救済を執行する、逸脱者を作り出そうとする試み、 救いの巻き場計
Okay.
画
I was gonna say something, so it sounds like they take people, made them like live really unfortunate lives or whatever, unfortunate like circumstances in the pasture or whatever. And because you need to have like a twisted personality or just like a lot of suffering. And suffering usually creates twisted personalities. Those causes genes to develop. And I guess they were gonna use those people who now had genes to, I don't know, do whatever. They say salvation of the world, but maybe other stuff is the gist of it.
その成功例の一つであるあなたは、コンセプト上は単
Oh
独で
shit.
世界を滅ぼすこともできるだけの力を秘めている。その危険性を理解しているなら、あなただって理解できるはずよ。仲間の屍の上に生きる覚悟が必要なことくらいは。
Mitsuji knew everything she was telling her was true. The kind, considerate sheep that was like a sister to her fellow cattle. She who was once considered such by the pasture could no longer retain such a convenient position anymore. She knew that it was just hard to accept, that was all. So she said it again.
ヘドが出る。藤吉の事件の発端はどうってことのない話だった。
That's like a crazy
どの
jinx
団
then.
体も
Generational
映像の
jinx that
活
can
動
get
として
passed
やって
on,
ること、
created by the Umetsu family.
隔離された関係性を探して、そこに未知のジンクスが存在しないか調べる。残念なことに、大概は存在する。それで先行して調べたあんたらが、現実改変の痕跡を感じた。それで同系統の能力の俺を連れてきた。
そうね。教会はあなたのことを限定的な現実改変能力者だと考えていたから。
She talked like she didn't have one herself. Mitsuji wanted to ask her where they found a lead on her, but decided to save that for later.
ああ、そう装ってたからな。しかし実際は本当の能力も被ってたってわけだ。
植松里香子。彼女への尋問の記録には全部目を通したわ。
And I guess even though they sucked the jinx out because Rikako obviously has a twisted personality, she was still able to like form like some remnants of her power, creating the tiny Tsuchidumo spider. I'm dead in it, kinda.
地獄めいた夢に求めた土雲2000数百年の怨念。まさかそんなに大きな話だとはね。
俺にはあいつが家畜より安全だとはどうしても思えねえがな。
仕方ないでしょ。今の彼女からは証言されるような強さの魔性が検出されなかったんだから。
They referred to the warped humanity that could form the basis of a jinx as diabolicity.
今の彼女はちょっとばかりひねくれたクールな知女ってとこ
I
かし
wonder
ら。
if they knew that she
その
has
程
a
度で
tiny
教
little
会は
spider.
命を取らないわよ
They。probably wouldn't leave that unchecked.
まあとにかく幸か不幸か相性は良かった。あいつの現実改変の隙間に俺の能力で干渉できたからな。
何をしたの？
現実が夢に変容する瞬間にあのバカと自分の記憶にアクセスして変容先のあいつと自分の脳みそに突っ込んだ。あとは意識の連続性ってやつ？魂とかそういうのをつなげるとかな。まあこの辺は気休めだけどよ。
なるほど。彼が事件解決に主要な役割を果たす手助けをしたのね。ちなみに彼が居合わせたのは本当に偶然なのね。
We hard carried, honestly. I don't know what Mitsuji's plan was if Haraki never came, though. Like, would she take an active role in there?
ああ、
If she, would she actually go to the village?
腹切ってでもこの仕事は降りてたろうよ。
No.
本当かしら。なんだかんだであなたは見捨てられないタイプに見えるけど。
け
とにかくたまたまあなたが夢使いで たまたま彼と現地で再会したからうまく事件解決ができたってわけね。
Mitsuji lazily nodded. The concept of the sheep and the cattle was to bring salvation through dreams. The concept itself wasn't all that new. If they could show all of mankind a blissful dream, they could attain salvation in their minds. Mankind's interests contained complicated self-contradictions. Achieving universal bliss by optimizing everyone's interests was difficult. So there are two easy methods conceived: either alter people's values and standardize them, or separate them and satisfy them individually. The former was a common idea that had been attempted to achieve throughout human history via religion, culture, and morals. The latter was an idea that had shown up in sci-fi and such over the past few decades, as the development of computer networks progressed. Mitsuji's power was the epitome of the latter. If they could show every human in the world their own blissful dream, all of mankind would attain bliss. Basically, she could use a power that showed others in a very wide range a specific dream. She could make dreams of all types and could read others' thoughts and memories through the dream, albeit in an incomplete fashion. That skill and subtlety, I always fuck up that word, even though obviously you know what it is. Subtlety was her true strength. However, there's another method of using dreams. When dreaming, a dreamer is under the illusion that everything happening is real. No matter how crazy things got inside, it was possible not to realize it was a dream. As long as they didn't, the dream was endlessly real to its observer. However, there were also jinx users who could do unrealistic things that could make the observer want to believe it was a dream. Thus, it was possible to alter reality through dreams. The observer could take the reality they didn't want to believe and swap it for one they did. Dream writing, a reality alteration / restoration phenomena that used denial of supernatural phenomena. It was different from standard reality alteration in that the dream wielder could prepare any reality they desired by merely attaining approval. For example, the reason Mitsuji had been able to prepare the convenience store and all the items Haraki had requested was because those were small-scale reality alterations via dreams. Okay, so there's a limit, obviously. You can't just make, like, I don't know, spawn in, like, the Statue of Liberty, like, 10 of them that can talk and stuff. But small stuff, it works out. She had told the church that her jinx was nothing more than that, an ability that let her create a base and supplies. It was a handy power to possess, but it did have its limits. She couldn't produce unlimited food to ration off forever, and though she could produce lifeboats, it would be difficult to produce a nuclear weapon. Probably a good thing. Basically, she couldn't attain agreement between the customer and herself to produce anything that definitely couldn't exist in the storage room. So it has to be possible that it's in the storage room exactly, so nothing bigger than that, or bigger than the door, I guess. Or like just something that would never, like, there's a chance there would be that item in a store in a market, like even if it's just a 1% chance. Because of this, reality alteration on a small scale was far from perfect, and all sorts of roadblocks had come up regarding implementation. To say nothing of long-range reality alteration. Creating a single dream that everyone affected could agree upon was next to impossible. In the end, it was a case filled with many self-contradictions to the point of nigh impossible as a way to make everyone happy. Therefore, to jinx users, long-range reality alteration was considered to be, ironically enough, unrealistic, or so it should have been. But this time was different.
植松里香子は夢による現実改変に特化したジンクス使いだった。例えばあいつの心霊治療も、要は夢の中の理想的な自分に現実を近づける能力。
Is that how that works? I liked how they explain it and I still don't get it.
それを取り出すために、雲だなんだって回りくどいイメージを使ってるのは、 俺から見れば無駄が多いが、しかし奴の真に恐れるべき能力がその無駄を難なく解消しちまう。
真に恐れるべき能力？
ああ、あの雲の驚異的な知覚能力、演算能力だよ。1000年単位で無数の先祖の怨念を織り込むという理由付けを与え続けた DD。 あれは従来の雲の担い手の夢操作能力を連結して並列で走らせてるようなもんで、その情報処理能力は想像を絶する。
I think what it's trying to say is Ratato has like that spiritual power or whatever, and then the spider thing's different, but obviously combining it with Ratato's power is what makes it like crazy.
もちろん、それでも理想の夢を純粋な計算でひねり出すのは難しい。
Maybe, I don't know. Again, this is
だか
all
ら
like
奴は別の方法を考え
it's veering into like weird territory.
それが巻き戻りだったの？
ああ、そうだ。一定の領域、一定の観測者たちのある瞬間の状況を完全に記録する。まるで
カメラみたいに？
ああ。しかし映像だけじゃない。その世界のその瞬間に起きたことすべてを記録するような途方もない荒技だ。それがあの雲にはできた。それでもって極めて精巧な過去の夢を作り出すこともな。自分が体験してきた過去ならばどんな人間でも同意できる。つまり今日一日頑張ったのは夢だったんだって具合に。
漫画とかでいう夢落ちを強制的に発生させる。
Yeah.
ああ、そういうもんだと思えばいい。ただしそれだってとんでもない話なんだ。今言った通りにな。
それは理解できたわ。つまり彼女をもってしても土雲の復活に足りるだけの糧、あれを都合よく全部回収したぞってな夢を作ることはできなかった。
Yeah. So it seems like she puts people in dreams and she can manipulate stuff, but she can't actually control the people in the dream, I guess.
だからあの集落でたまたま文化的に継続していた殺人慣習を
Yeah, but luckily the village had a murder ritual, which really helped her plans.
でも彼女はそのために世界すべてを巻き戻してたわけじゃないんでしょ？
その通り。もしそうなったらもっともっと強力なカメラが必要になっただろう。
そうよね。あなたの理屈だと。
俺や春秋のやつが味わった無数のループは実際は雲の夢の中で発生してたことだ。いわばシミュレーションだな。最初のセーブポイントから全ての登場人物を自由に歩かせて、設定した失敗条件が満たされたら夢を最初からやり直す。
そして最終的にいい結果が出た時だけその夢を現実と差し替える。
So they're saying she wasn't like turning back time for everyone. It was like a miniaturized thing. I mean, we knew this. They're just making it sound confusing. But yeah, we knew
そうい
this.
うことだ。だから実際俺らがループ地獄を味わってる間、時間は1秒も進んじゃいなかった
Yeah, it's self-contained.
これもまた
It's not like that global time
演
loop
算能力に
thing.
よるものだ。本当失敗してよかったと思うぜ。
まったくね。
もう一つ、植松里香子の賢かった点は自分の死を改変発動のトリガーにしたところだな。
Yeah, it's a good way to set like the loop to restart when she dies, just so like if someone does try to stop her, then you're Gucci. Because like if it didn't loop back when she died and someone did kill her before she could loop back, then that would just become reality. And the reality would be she was dead and I guess anyone else, so it worked out nicely. It was a good backup plan for her though.
ああ、彼女は確か証言してたわね。土雲の現世の復活には地獄の入り口だというサラナ川や霧のシチュエーションが必須だったって。
ああ、ジンクス成立の背景となすことのデカさを考えれば、そういう面倒な手続きが必要だったのは不思議じゃ。しかしそうなると、安全な場所で夢を見守ってるわけにはいかないわけだ。殺人現場近くで常に待機する必要がある。失敗しそうな時、能動的にリセットをかける手もあったろうが、もしそれだと不意打ちで死んだ時に対応できねえ。その場合、夢の中とはいえ、自分が死んだ夢が現実にフィードバックしないとも限らねえ。それに、たとえ現実に戻れたとしても、夢を再開するまでにいくらかは現実の時計の針を進めちまう。あいつ何千だか何万だかループを繰り返してたって話だろ。
本人の証言が正しければ17万6201回らしいわよ。
That's more than I thought, man. That's like Rita numbers, right? How much did Rita loop in Higurashi? That's actually kind of insane. I was thinking like in the 10,000s, man. Let me doodle this. How many times did Rita loop? In the Hidra AI answer, Rita Fude has lived through the equivalent of over 100 years. While the exact number of loops is not specified, it's implied to be around 2,600. No way, bro. I thought it was way longer than that. They're just doing pseudo-math. There's no real answer. But, yeah, I'm not gonna answer that. Anyway, that's a lot of loops.
もし現実世界でリセット手続きを踏むのに1秒かかったとしても、
That's a lot of
17万回も
loops.
繰り返せばだいたい2日分ずれちまう。
Though, to be fair, Rikato's loops are a lot shorter than Rita's loops, so.
彼女、儀式発
Like a
動に
lot
は
shorter.
丸1日かかったとも証言してたわね。
マジか。毎回それだけの時間かけてたら、実時間で400年とか経過するぜ。だから、半ば独立した存在である夢の土雲が自分の生命停止を感知し次第、自動で。
それで復活に必要な手続きをするために夢を出る必要はなくなり、ほぼ0時間でリセットをかけられるようになった。その上、自分の死という絶対失敗条件が発生した後は、迅速にやり直しが発生する無駄のないスキームが完成した。
そういうことだ。
賢いわね。
いや、確かにその仕掛けはうまくできてたが、奴はそれは巻き戻りの直後からイレギュラーな動きを始める人間を放置したことだ。
Like, she recognized that Haruaki and Shemi, like, somehow affected the loops, but she never realized, or I guess, recognized the danger it's in. Like, it's funny, like, she thought, like, oh, there's something special about them, but not, like, she didn't even really consider the fact that they keep their memories or anything like that. So, also, yeah. Oh, so what about Meiko? I know they don't talk about Meiko, surely. And we still don't know how Chemi kept her memories, but it might just be her powers Because she's really connected to gods and stuff, I guess.
雲によって記憶を現実改変の外側に置き、保持してる自分以外は記憶を持ち越せるはずがないんだ。なのに奴はそれを疑問視しなかったばかりか、歓迎さえした。そいつは夢使いの戦い方じゃねえ。夢使いは夢を完全に掌握してこそ優位に立てるんだ。魔王の役回りさ。あいつは春秋と千恵美をとっとと夢から追い出すか、毎回振り出しの時点でぶっ殺すべきだったんだ。その上であくまで自力で努力して最良の結果
But that was modeled by Ratato, because Ratato kind of liked Chimmy, and obviously Ratato liked Haruaki. And that was the downfall. I guess like if they followed Mitsuji's advice and just got rid of the problems, then probably would have never failed, unless again Mitsuji cooked something up.
それをせず、あいつは白馬の王子様を願っちまった。
Yeah.
登場人物を入れ替えるだけのために
Misplayed.
もいろいろいじった。結局それで春秋のやつを呼び込んだんだから、世話はねえ。その甘さがなきゃ俺たちが負けてただろうよ。
あなたがそこまで言うならよほどだったのね。
分かってんのかよ。救いの牧場なんかと年季が違う2000年越しの復讐譚だぜ。
Big boy. Apparently not for Meito though.
しかもなんだかんだで
So I guess like
ジン
maybe
クスの系統だった知識もねえくせに、あそこまで使える能力に育てた血統の所業だ。
okay, ignore the thing I said a couple episodes ago about Meito being connected to darkness, which she might be, but maybe like Meito isn't like super powerful, but her jinx is literally just to eat other jinxes. Like, so technically, like, I mean, obviously that is powerful, but like in a scheme of things, it's not like super powerful, it's just like a hard counter.
こ
If
こ
that
まで
makes
のや
sense.
つはそうそういねえだろうけどよ。にしても冗談じゃねえって言うんだよ。この国には今後どんだけこんなバカみてえな事件が起きるんだ。
And obviously, I'm guessing all these organizations are like global, right? All the shit isn't just happening in Japan, surely.
まあ私自身はそういうのは3回くらいかな。
3 Tsuchigumo-sized events?
不幸な人はいるし、そのう
It's
ち
kinda
の何割かは危険な力を持って社会に復讐しようとするわけよ。珍しい。教会で働いてるとそういうのからは逃げられないからね。あなたにも
無理無理。俺はせいぜい運び屋と後方支援
Come
に
on,
徹させてもらう
Mitsuji.
ぜ。
We need the sheep in the field, man.
ま、表向きはそうした方がいいわね。ただ、あなたのポテンシャルを私は正確に知っておきたい。あなた、解決の直前に相当危ない瞬間があったみたいなこと言ってたわよ
Meito
ね。
happened.
何があったの？
Or when she got caught. Both are kind of dangerous. I guess more dangerous for her was when she got caught and almost killed. Oh, okay. It is talking about when she... Oh, and I guess maybe because she got caught and almost killed, she didn't get to observe the Meito part, maybe? Mitsuji hesitated. It would be like revealing an ace up her sleeve. Did she really trust this woman?
疑ってるって顔ね。いいわ。もし話してくれるなら、私も自分の能力を
Secret for secret trade. But what if she just doesn't? And we're boned.
そりゃいいな。俺もあんたみたくいくつだかわかんねえ美人になれるか？
失礼な子ね。まあ、化粧のテクは応用が効くから、別途教えてもいいけど、あなた、素材は可愛いし。
Normally, Mitsuji had no interest in her femininity. At first, she said she wished she was born a guy, and her sexual orientation leaned that way to some degree. It was for that reason that her jinx avatar, the sheep, sounded like a guy.
まあいいや。あんたには話しとく。最悪、死ぬまで悪夢の刑にしてやるし。
そりゃ、ご勘弁願いたいわね。せいぜい漏らさないように注意する。
It was at this point Mitsuji successfully set a secret trap to seal her superior in the dream if she went against her word. Nice. Just in case. What was so terrifying about the sheep was it could do that.
俺が危ない橋を渡ったのは2度だ。最初はあのバカがドジ踏んだ時。2度目は
ふむふむ。
まあ簡単に言えば復活した雲の頭の中に無理やり入り込んで振り出しの写真を盗み見たのさ。植松からすりゃ目的は遂げたわけだからもうリセットボタンを押す必要はない。だからその時に限っちゃ現実改変は俺の自前
When
で
she
やっ
let
た
her
んだ。
guard down because she thought she won.
雲の記憶したその瞬間をあなたが夢として練り上げ、それを現実と差し替えたのね。
そうさ。正確には雲とあのバカの記憶両方元にしたけどな。あいつには確実に記憶を持たせなきゃならなかったから。
To make him agree easily without having him notice the unnatural moment of the swap, she had literally killed Haruaki. Not that she needed to say that, nor did she feel bad about it. Via a million sheep?
聞く限りで
And
は
sheep poop
相当
in
の
the
大
second
技の
time?
ようだけど、よく植松里香子に気づかれなかったわね。
まあ夢使いはある意味始終妄想してるようなもんだからな。多少の既視感は見過ごすかもと期待はしたさ。
That makes kind of sense. Oh, permanently drowsy.
あいつにとっちゃ念願が叶って土雲が復活したと思ったら夢だったなんてありそうな話だろ。
それで一旦は納得したと。
Till it happened again.
だが最後のはかなり無理をした。雲が忘れかけてた最初の方の記憶を俺と春明の記憶と混ぜて再利用した。結果的に実時間より遡った夢を作り出す羽目になった。雲から
気づかれたと。
ああ、まさか自分と似たような能力者がすぐそばで暗躍してるなんざ思わなかっただろうが、一度気づけばすぐさ。なんせ相手は軍事衛星も真っ青の超感覚と超頭脳だ。いくら俺が羊だっつっても生身の単身でどうこうなるわけでもねえ。それでも2日間くらいは耐えた。その後はアバターをやられてノックダウンさ。
それだけど、あなたは能力行使に際してアバターを必要とするのよね。他の家畜もそうなの？
ああ、そういうやつは多い。何しろ牧場と家畜ってコンセプトで動機づけをガキの頃からするんだ。
Meiko? Did she call herself a Tato? Like, I kind of remember her talking about stuff like this, like, throughout the story, but I don't
モデル
remember
の動物の
exactly.
イメージは鮮明で自分のイメージと強烈に結びついてる方がいい。自然、形になるさ。
うん。となると S 型または G 型。獣のモデルにするならまあ妥当かしら。
学会員みてえなこと言うんだな、あんた。
これでもディアグノーザーの学会資格は持ってるから私。しかしアバターをやられてよく無事だったわね。それ以来能力に支障が残ったりしなかった？
俺らのアバターなりメタモルフォシスなりはそういう能力損傷の危険を経ても魔性の核が傷つかないように作られてる。
なるほど、トカゲの尻尾か。本体の生存を最優先とし脱出と再決起の瞬間を待つ。マジで世界を救う戦争なんて起こそうとしてたの？
牧場主が何考えてたのかなんて知らねえよ。あんたらか誰かがもうぶっ殺しちまったんだから。ただ末端の家畜やその候補たちはそう信じてたさ。自分たちが世界を救う救いの牧場を
ふむ、そっちの話も興味深いけど、まずは報告をどうするかね。
そうだな。
ふむ、わかった。 そうしましょう。あなたは
That's
何もし
not
なかった。
entirely fair, but
は
that's
状
just
況的
to
に
hide
植松理
her
香子の
power
中に
level.
も矛盾した気持ちがあったのは間違いない。だからそれが形をとって現れた。その植松理香子の前世みたいなものが
No
久石
Meito
春
talk
明
is
や
crazy
芹
though.
沢千恵美を導いて
They're
最終的
saving it
に
all.
土雲を敗北させ
If
た。
Meito doesn't come back in Deathloop,
そ
I
の場合
riot.
俺の扱いってどうなるんだよ。
基本すべてのループをコンビニ店員としてぼーっと過ごしたって感じかしら。
Not the greatest look for an image.
ひどすぎんだろ。言えないにしても多少活躍したことにしてくれよ。
あらら要注意。人間が失敗する原因のベスト3に入るのが功名心よ。目立たないでいいのは幸運と思わなきゃ。
わかったよ。
にしてもあの二人もちょっと注意すべきね。
まあ、そうかもな。
Honestly, in all honesty, Mitsuji still had feelings for Haruaki. Her relationship with him had awakened / allowed her to exhibit a femininity she never knew she had. It annoyed and embarrassed her whenever she thought about it, and she never wanted to be in a situation like that again. But when she was with Haruaki, he allowed her to be all that. She dated him with feelings so fresh, she felt like a completely different person. She couldn't deny that for her, who had been living a double life as a spy for the project at the time, the relationship had been very relaxing. Nor could she deny that the 2 years she spent talking to him were now part of her life. However, she also knew she wasn't the type to stay tied down. If they kept dating, Haruaki would have likely realized the truth about her and proceeded to interrogate her non-stop. For that was his nature. He would have certainly been led to the project and the jinxes as a result. And then he would have ruined himself, no doubt about it. His disposition was simply that twisted and antagonistic. Whenever he did an activity he considered scary or interesting, he would always give the person he was facing off against a bad time. True? It was a nasty, cursed fate, like that of a protagonist of a story. If she were just an ordinary woman, that would have been fine, revealing the secrets of neighbors and internal company affairs didn't always lead to life-threatening danger. But in the extraordinary life that Mitsuji lived, he would have been erased before long by someone with conflicting interests, and loath as she was to admit it, she didn't want that. Well, the biggest reason she broke up with him was because the war between her desire to kill him and her desire to bask more in their relationship had finally come to a close. The black seed sesame pudding had been the trigger for that, and in the end she couldn't reach a compromise with a part of her who'd curl up in his arms and cry.
が、もう手遅れかもしれねえな。
彼はもう手遅れかもしれないわね。
Mitsuji was stunned, feeling like her mind had been read. The mug of her superior handed over was full of tepid coffee.
何がだよ。
Also, she never revealed her power, by the way. What happened to the deal? Mitsuji had long stopped acting polite for formality's sake around her superior, but she felt this was an appropriate sense of distance.
彼、超常現象に深入りしすぎたでしょ。あなたの正体も半ば知ったわけだし、契約は成立したと思うべきでしょう。
Plus, probably don't know about it, but he also had a run-in with a bear god.
今後彼はジンクス使いとして目覚めるかもしれない。
もう目覚めてるかもしれねえぞ。
え？
あるだろ。アーキタイプの中の
Detective
探
Jinx.
偵ってやつが。
あれは超強力な無実化特化能力者か、あるいはジンクス無効化の現実改変者を示すアーキタイプよ。
ああ、知ってるさ。ジンクス的事件をとんでもないへりくつを通すことで現実の事件だったことに
Logic
してもらう
chads, basically. Superpowers? I think not. explain this logically, and even if it was something supernatural, I guess their power would like overwrite it to be making it natural.
今回は大体そういうことになったわけだろ。
まあ表向きはね。でもあなたがこう証言しているんだから。
でも諸事情あって記録には残らないわけだろ。
ありえなくもないかもね。ちょっと注目した方がいいのかも。ただ私はむしろ芹沢千恵美の方が危ない気がする。
God slaying
あの
power.
子の神を殺す力。
神が何かによるんじゃね。
そりゃそうだけど、ジンクス的に言えば悪魔的な存在を無条件で知覚して殺せるとかなったら
悪魔ね。あいつの言ってた神ってそういう存在でもなさそうだけど。
From a Jin standpoint, humans who traveled too far down the path of deviancy were called demons. It was a hypothetical concept of a person who lost practically all ability to form relationships with humans, to the point where they couldn't even perceive them anymore. However, there are plenty of deviants who alluded to the existence of demons, so they probably existed. It was just hard to prove. On the other hand, the god Haraki had explained afterwards over the phone seemed to be a type of concept completely different from Jinx's. It was more like an alien or a real ghost.
そっちは録音テープ聞いたから
So gods aren't part of the Jinx phenomena?
まあ確かにね。
And how is Tsuchigumo a Jinx? Wouldn't he be or she be classified as a god?
人間に知覚さ
Maybe?
れる
I
こ
don't
と
know.
で活性化、電波、変異する知的存在。どっちかっていうと SF の世界の話みたい。
春秋の定義だと植松の土雲も神の一種になるみてえだけど。
True,
そっちは千恵
actually.
美には気づけなかったんだろ。
She noticed the bear god and our god, but not Tsuchigumo as a god, which is, I guess that probably proves that that's not actually a god. Huh, that's a good way of answering my question.
土雲はジンクス的には DD で説明がつくんだ。別物だと考えた方がしっくりくるけどな。
それは植松里香子が神内明神の信仰で隠蔽してたとも考えられるけど、悪魔と神は別物の線が濃厚か。でももしそんな神が実在したとして、これまで世界のどこからも似たような分析が出てこなかったのはなぜかしら。富士吉村は特殊な環境だったけど、あそこにだけ神がいたっていうのも不自然な話に思えるわ。
あんた、こんな話聞いたことあるか？
なになに？エッチな話？
ちげえ！いきなり何言い出してんだ！そんなキャラじゃねえだろ、あんたはよ！
いやー、私くらい逸脱しちゃうと、たまに意識してキャラ崩さないと、行動パターンが確一化されてやばいのよ。
とにかく話ってのは、あれだ。世界
The
の法
OGs?
則を刻んだ人間の話。
何それ？牧場限定の話？
まあ、そうかもしれねえな。ジンクス絡みの話じゃあるから。人間は逸脱しすぎると悪魔になる。悪魔は契約者以外には見ることさえできない存在だ。しかし悪魔と契約してるとか嘘吹く連中は大概ジンクス的にはとんでもない力を持っている。
そういう話もあるわね。
おかしくねえか？ジンクス的には現象発生のために相互理解と契約が必須になるはずだ。知覚できないパワーソースがそんなとんでもない力を与えたら理屈の前提がひっくり返らねえか？
一応ジンクス理論はあくまで他の理論と同様仮説に過ぎないわ。そもそもジンクス的能力の全てが単一の理論で定義できるかも相当怪しい状況なんだから。
この話では 逆のことが言われる。悪魔は世界と断絶してるんじゃない。むしろジンクスは常識を歪める能力だ。それゆえに強靭に結びつけられていて、普通の社会では最初から締め出されてる。しかし強靭じゃない、見えもしない存在が能力を行使すれば、それは嘘やインチキだとはかえって認識されにくい。悪魔はすでに世界に受け入れられかかっていて、そのせいで逆に見えづらくなっている。この考え方でいけば、極まった悪魔はどうなるかっていうと、
世界に法則を刻むって、もしかして。
ああ、そうさ。ジンクスが世界の法則に組み込まれるんだ。そして誰もそれをおかしいと思わなくなる。ちなみに俺は、そうなった悪魔は法になると教わった。例えば、ニュートンという男が法と化したから、この世界はニュートン力学に支配されたとか。
おお、大胆すぎる説ね。過分にして聞いたことがなかったわ。それだと、太古の自然科学者や思想家が何らかの法をもたらしたから、現在の世界の秩序があるってことかしら。
その通りだ。それどころか、アダムという存在が法と化して有性生殖が生まれたかもしれねえな。
まさに魔法みたいな話ね。
ああ。
We're deep in this sauce, man.
だからこそ、自分
Like,
たち
I understand
が
what they're
この世
saying,
界
but
に
like,
幸福という法をもたらす必要
it's still
がある。
confusing.
なるほど。テロリストに与えるにはもってこいの壮大で理想じみてて一発逆転主義な筋書きだわ。で、それが今までの話と何の関係があるっていうの？
ああ。状況はもちろん違うんだがよ。ただ、ちょっと嫌な想像をしちまったんだ。ちえみが漠然と知覚してた神について、春秋のバカが今回、明確な定義づけを行っちまったわけだろ。
待って、嫌な予感が私もして。
もし世界の法則が悪魔にしろ何にしろ、
Saying that Haruati traded the god rule and more gods can form or be perceived now?
春秋の神の定義がまかり間違って採用されちまって、今後神ってのが
Well,
そういう形で
there you
ボ
go.
コボコ
With his
現れるかも。
detective power thing. Or just in general. Establishing a role.
いやいやいや、さすがに飛躍しすぎだから。
確かに春秋は探偵とはちょっと違うかもしれねえ。不可思議の存在を否定してねえからな。むしろ不可思議に対して現実世界と親和性のある説明をひねり出すことで現実化させちまう能力だとしたら。
笑えない。
だろ。ただどうだろうな。そっちはそっちで大変だろうとは思うが、俺らの世界とはあんまり交差しねえかもしれねえ。
そうかしら。ジンクス使いはね、無意味なすれ違いをあまりしないものよ。
だから必ず再会するって？
そうよ。だって私たちは強くなるために自分で世界を狭くすることしかできない。現にあなたは破局した後、何の打ち合わせもしないままここで彼と再会し、それが事件解決につながっている。
Mitsuji didn't object. She herself had found it unnatural. It could only be explained by a Jinsite interpretation of their relationship.
この先きっとことさら困難なタイミングで彼らと再会するのよ。助けになるか、さらにややこしくなるかはわからないけど。
やめてくれよ。こんな仮説立てるんじゃなかったな。
そんなことはないわ。少なくとも私はあらゆる悪い想像をしておかなきゃならない立場にあるし、超科学理論を現実化するジンクスか。もしそんなアーキタイプがあるとすれば、 どう名付けるべきかしら。
魔法使い。
言えて妙ね。
Tired of talking, the pair both brought the cold coffee to their lips at the exact same time, like mirror images. It was instant. She also put sugar in without asking. Not that Mitsuji was complaining.
とりあえず、
I'm more of a
今
black
聞き
coffee
たい
guy
のはこんな
myself.
ところかしら。あとはそっちでもまとめられるわよね。
What about
あ
Meiko, man?
ただ、
何？
植松里香子が土壇場で一切のジンクスを
They
奪
don't
われた
know,
の
man.
は、
They don't know.
ありゃどう説明つければいいんだ。
They don't know my dote. My dote was lurking.
ジンクスの喪失はありえない現象じゃないが、そのタイミングで停電を伴って起きたってのは、どう考えても作為的だ。あの場に誰かが介入したとしか思えない。
知ってるでしょ？藤吉村の他の住人は白だったって。
Okay, but what about
バスガイドに偽装した
Meiko?
うちの子が言ってた。
The obvious answer? The mysterious girl? The third, like, person that's not supposed to be there?
一応、逸脱者はいたんだろ？
そうね。牧島春に鴨志田近持。両名ともあの現場にもいたし、神に関する貴重なサンプルなのは疑いないわ。得体の知れない強力なジンクスらしいし、その神が働きかけて雲を消滅させたってのがいい線じゃない？
まあ、それくらいしか考えられねえだろうな。ちなみにその二人、教会はどうするつもりなんだ？
別に、普通の注意すべき一般人と同じ扱いよ。人を差し向けて、遠巻きに監視することになるんじゃないかな。
そんな一筋縄で行きゃいいがな。あの神ってやつが。
ずいぶん、神を危険視してるのね。
一応、俺たちには信仰があるもんでな。神と名の付く者には、敬意と警戒を払いたくなるんだ。
At the very least, the Salvation Pasture Project had incorporated concepts and values from Abrahamic religions. That was also the reason why all the cattle were born on December 25th on paper, anyway. What that? To symbolize they were all messiahs in the making.
半神論的な神は、いわゆるヤハウェやアッラーのような唯一神とは、本質的に異なる概念とも聞くわよ。
そんなのはいいんだ。俺たちにとっちゃ、誰がこの世界を作って、試練を与えて、滅ぼす権限を持ってるのかが重要だ。あんた、計画がどうして立てられたか知ってるか？
終末論的テロリズムによって、自分たちの理想郷を作るため、と。
完全には否定はしねえ。ただ一方で、牧場主のやつは多分本気で、終末が来ることを確信していた。
だから本気で救世を？
ああ。どんな形の終末が来るのかはわからなかったから、こうして山ほど家畜を養殖したわけだ。
言っとく
Just
け
in
ど、
case.
そういう妄想で事件を起こすやつは、ジンクス社会の外にも中にも山ほどいるからね。
True. I don't know. If I was rich, I'd probably build like a bunker. To be honest, like if I had a lot of disposable income.
知ってるよ。
Because why not, man?
まあ、俺たちがその例に漏れない、ただのバカどもだったってことなら、それに越したことはない。あとはあんたら教会やらが世界を守ってくれればいいさ。それが、牧場を襲った
They're the
狼
wolf.
の責務だ。
Now there's some lore I recognize. So Mako thinks of the church as the wolf and has labeled them as the bad guys. So Mako and the church don't get along, which should have been obvious anyways, but it's nice to have some confirmation on that.
狼ね。
Feeling our companion's eyes boring right into her, Mitsuji sipped her coffee, leaned back in her office chair, and looked up at the ceiling. At the Salvation Pasture Project, Wolf was a code that referred to two things. The first referred to a case where either the project was exposed or an investigation or attack that could have a great impact on the progression of the project that came from authorities or the academia. When they said the wolf is coming, the cattle and those associated with the project were to quickly escape and go into hiding, or so they were supposed to. But in the end, that had backfired due to sleeper agents and defectors, and the project was totally destroyed. The DD designed Diabolocity production project, a complete first in history, may have created many with unprecedented powers, but it was lacking in intelligence. The other was a mere legend, whispered only amongst the cattle, of a cattle who specialized in killing cattle. Dude, that's Mako. That or is a plan to deal with the cattle capable of destroying the world who had already been released into it. That's actually Mako? Whatever the case, it was a word that symbolized fear and hostility to the cattle. In other words, Fenrir, the world-killing wolf. Though I guess it can't be Mako, because Mako has a goat avatar, and she talked about the wolf as a bad thing, so that's not Mako. However, but she does have the power to kill other jinxes, so. Or eat them, I guess. Maybe that's different than killing them. However, according to all the Central Intelligence Mitsuji had come into contact with, working as an intelligence officer for the project, no such thing existed. She would have no way of finding such information if it only existed in the brains of a select few of the top brass, including the ranchers, but it didn't seem likely to her. That said, an aberrant like Mitsuji didn't think it was impossible for there to be an aberrant jinx user like that. If there was such a user, she'd probably come across them eventually due to the bond linking jinx users, and if she did, all she could do was fight to the best of her ability. When she thought that, an idea suddenly came to Mitsuji. It was a trifling idea. No, a memory.
Did
they just forget about Mako? Like, did the memory get wiped?
そりゃっていうか報告書にまとめるようでまとめてメールしたじゃない。
そうだっけか。あ、本当だ。
いきなりどうしたの?
The recollection immediately became an unpleasant conviction.
足りない。
Mako? Yeah, they just forgot her.
藤吉村の現住人が11人、うち老人1名が死亡、外部からの取材者2名、さらに春秋のバカを加えたら15人。あいつの話では読み意味の宴の最大人数は16人だったはず。
まずい見落としね。リストから欠けてるのは誰？
わからねえ。だが俺はアバターを通して見た。4歳くらいの女のガキだ。
子供？そんな住人いないわよ。
I thought she knew more than that, but she didn't even know Mako's name. I guess she really wasn't like observing close. I thought she was like looking closer than I thought, but she really had like an outside perspective.
じゃあ外から入り込んだんだ。
そんな子供が一人で？一体どんな事情？The
woman's word trailed off for the same reason as Mitsuji.
ジンクス的因縁によって人と人が都合よく出会うことってあんたの実感としてはよくあることか？
ええ、ひどくよくあることね。
牧場から逃げたうち、4歳くらいのガキはいなかったか？
Real Mako lore incoming?
あなたに伝えることには
Wait, tell us.
抵抗があるわ。
Black Goat.
俺は逃亡者だ。今さら戻ろうなんて思わねえ。
Sheepdog.
グループは牧羊犬の仕事だ。知ってるだろ?
Mitsuji had already gone over what the project's plan was if the wolf came, to suspend it and flee. In those situations, everyone was supposed to scatter in different random directions. After all, if an escape route plan had existed, the fugitives would all be rounded up if that ever leaked. In preparation for the arrival of the wolf, a Jin Caesar was designated for the purpose of regathering the cattle. That was the sheepdog. The sheepdog was a cattle kept under a heavy veil of secrecy, and Mitsuji had never met them. But in the end, they'd been caught and were now collaborating with the academia, so this meticulous plan had grown moot. Mitsuji couldn't blame the sheepdog. After all, she also thought of selling her cameras to keep herself safe. However, even though she was now hiding right under the church's noses to stay hidden, she feared the sheepdog would find her one day. But that was another story.
絶対に言わない約束よ。破ったらあなた顔がなくなるからね。
上等だ。
It's no Meito lore, it was a contract. Mitsuji knew the superior was a considerably skilled Jin Caesar, thus she would assume the restrictions had already come into effect. It was like they had each other at gunpoint. Mitsuji gulped, smiled, and steeled herself once more.
脱出組の家畜は確認されているだけで34名。そのうち成功例が7名で、あなたもこれに含まれる。加えて、学会の襲撃のギリギリ前に若干名の子供が施設から連れ出されていると、わずかな証言から推測されている。
Few children. The pastor had predicted the attack, which meant that the children they put priority on setting free behind closed doors were.
理想例の可能性があるガキか。
Amongst all the kids impounded by the project, only those who showed signs of jinxes were called cattle. There are three types of cattle: successes, failures, and ideals. Due to the abnormal education the children raised in the Salvation Pasture received, there's a high chance of them displaying a DD and obtaining a jinx. But that didn't mean they'd always get the jinx they'd been aiming for. Those who obtained jinxes that follow their concept, those that possess the spets and ability to achieve worldwide salvations, were called successes. Those who developed jinxes that either went against their concepts or clearly didn't match up to the level of concepts they'd been aiming for were called failures. From what Mitsuji knew, there were about a dozen successes, including herself, while there were supposedly many times more failures. But even the failures had abilities that could prove useful for some projects or another, so they were kept in the confines of the pasture's facility. Most of them were ignorant detainees who had supposedly seen the end of the project in the recent attack by the academia. Mitsuji had heard that after that they were all executed alongside the children who hadn't shown signs of jinxes. This inhuman and unprecedented measure had become well known in their world and had sparked massive debate, but that was beside the point. Though they were called successes, that didn't necessarily mean they were successes for the overall project. For example, the concept of the sheep was to bring salvation through dreams, but it was clear that didn't necessarily mean perfect salvation. It was merely something like euthanasia. Eternally delaying the moment the physical world ended in a subjective world and immersing in a blissful dream was not true salvation. In fact, all of the current successes could only bring about dystopian salvation such as that. Salvation meant as a stopgap measure gathered to prepare for the coming end of the world. The successes were stopgap measures with a high success rate but a low salvation rate. Conversely, the Salvation Pasture project has also been undertaking the creation of DD even more complicated and delicate, yet capable of attaining true salvation. Those were ideals. As they were wrapped up in as much secrecy as the sheepdog, Mitsuji barely knew a thing about them.
わからないわ。その子たちについては、計画自体のざるっぷりからは考えられないほど情報統制が効いている。しかしきっと恐ろしく重要な子供たち。他をすべて投げ打っても計画のために逃がしたかった子たちでしょうから。脱出組狩りが一段落したら、牧羊犬はその子たちを探すことになるでしょうね。
なるほど。それまで逃げ延びられれば、俺は一安心ってわけだな。しかし、あのガキが理想例だとしたら、その一緒に逃げた世話係とはぐれたってことか。
Had to be, since she came alone. Was there even such a person? If they were treating her so carefully, her helpers should have been plenty talented in their own right. Like a skilled failure cattle or something. Would someone like that really do something like leave a child in the middle of a mountain like it were nothing? And more than anything, Mitsuji had a question. The girl she'd seen just for a moment in that gray dream that became reality didn't look the least bit like a powerful ideal. Special jinxes were linked to special diabolicities, so shouldn't ideals be kids who were clearly abnormal? That idyllic girl looked only like a failure at best. And sure enough, Mitsuji's superior was regarding her pensively as if she had the other answer.
今から言うことは、私が独自ルートで知るに至った情報。今の段階で絶対に出回るはずのない情報。
もったいつけるなよ。ここまでクリア漏らすわけねえだろ。
4月に失敗例の家畜が一人、学会の拘束を振り切って逃
Okay,
走
she
した。
might not be an ideal. She might have just been the failure. The failure that could, though. And they said even though the failures aren't necessarily weaker, they just don't line up with saving the world. So.
それはちょうど4歳くらいの子供だったらしいわ。黒ヤギ。
Black Goat. I mean, that's definitely Mako.
聞いたことがある。体内回帰による救済の失敗例。
That's what she said about birthing Tsuchijumo.
どうとかって。しかし待てよ。皆殺しじゃなかったのか？その上あの連中がガキ一匹にやられたってのか？
どうやら学会側ではデータ採集のため名簿をごまかして居残り組たちを囲ってたらしい。調べだけど、ええ、黒ヤギは想定以上に危険な存在だったみたいね。
しかし、
学会行為の研究者が数名、全身をバラバラにされて殺されてる。
That's what you get for messing with Mako, though? Deserved?
おそらくは本人に比してかなり強力なアバターを持ってる。その上、くそ、なぜ気づかなかったのかしら。生き残った連中の中には精神をやられ、ジンクスを喪失した者もいたようよ。これって
決まりじゃねえかよ。
Yep, at least they realized it. That jinx was a concept based on the myth of a black goat of darkness, from some mythology that devoured and rebirthed all in creation. That girl who had been declared a failure due to her limited stomach capacity probably possessed another perfect ability. In other words, that black goat was...
黒ヤギは魔性を食ったんだ。
So it is like the wolf, though. She'd eaten the diabolicity of all those present when she escaped the academia. And after she slipped into Fujiyoshi, she'd gone on the run again and devoured Rikako Umetsu's diabolicity. And that's why she was tweaking after that.
幸か不幸かわからないわね。羊と黒ヤギがニアミスしてたって事実は。
It's probably good for Mitsuji.
ああ、そうだな。
What would Mitsuji have done if she recognized her as the Black Goat? Would she have abandoned her mission to the church and helping the people of Fujiyoshi to take her and flee? Or would she have presented her to the church for self-protection, offering cheap compassion along the way? That was a pointless supposition.
ジンクス使い同士は無意味なすれ違いはしないんだよな。
ええ、無意味じゃなかったのでしょうね。
つまり、黒ヤギが逃げおおせるのは必然だったってのか。
さあわからない。運命論は私も嫌い。ただ、簡単に捕まってしまわなかったということは、嫌な予感はしちゃうわね。
The Black Goat was still on the run, all while concealing an exceedingly powerful jinx in her diabolicity. The problem was that it couldn't save the world. If she kept concealing it as she grew up, perhaps it would become a threat that could rival that of the imaginary wolf.
さあな。
Mitsuji didn't know. To a cattle and fugitive like her, she didn't know if a monstrous entity born into this world like that was a bad thing. Mitsuji Misamine Through her activities in the outside world and meeting with Haruaki Fusaishi, knew that the project was inhumane and abominable. They even called the innocent children they turned into monsters for the sake of the project cattle. That girl, who had been burned with a heavy burden to bear and had been abandoned by her fellow cattle like Misamine and the sheepdog, was unmistakably miserable. Didn't she have the right to take revenge on the world? And wouldn't Mitsuji herself be condemned by an entity like that girl for running away without lending a helping hand? Wisely, the adult and Mitsuji avoided answering those questions and pushed them aside.
黒柳のことはここだけの秘密ね。でないとあなたの正体がバレるし、上役である私の責任追及も免れない。
だな。何せリストの見落としで最重要危険人物を取り逃がしたんだ。
あなたのせいでもあるでしょ。
ああ、そうだ。もしかしたら知ってて逃がしたかもしれねえぜ。
Clearly not from this conversation.
もしそうならあなたはもっと動揺してるわよ、羊さん。生きがってるけど本来は小心で純朴でしょ、あなた。
うるせえな。
黒柳か。その子にも会ってみたいわね。
会えるんじゃねえのか。ここまで深入りしちまったんだからよ。
The bond between jinsas would likely bring them together eventually.
今後ともよろしく。
ああ。
Her superior now gone, Mitsuji turned back to the PC screen. She deleted the threatening walls of text she'd written and quickly began typing the fate story she'd been ordered to type up. This kind of report didn't matter anymore. To Mitsuji, the incident had only just begun. She was sure of that. Dun dun dun. End. There you go, final story Meito Lord finally had. P.S. 6 years later, violent and terrifying criminals known as the Black Goats Seputulets became well known in the world of superpowers. After this, the church successfully made contact with the Black Goat behind closed doors, and the power dynamics in the world of superpowers shifted even further. PPS. 4 years after that, the following conversation occurred in the corner of a provincial city. Morlor? Mako raised a cult? Is everything in order? Yeah, but for someone who used to be your ally, you should take care of them pretty easily. I don't see or feel the need to draw the line between enemies and allies at the scene of a murder. It does you and is more trouble than it's worth. Huh, what an annoying way to put it. In any case, I'm grateful. Thanks, though I'd say Mi-chan and the others deserve the most credit. Anyway, you should go to your sister's place. I have no choice, so I have to stay out of school for a little while. Roger, leave the printouts and notes to me. Are you okay with that? I'm asking if you're okay not going after him alongside the others. Well, we should let the two who went forward back then take the lead now, don't you think? Not that any of that matters. How annoying. Oh well, it's fine. I prefer those who are more mature, composed, and craftier myself. Well, you got the last one at least. Yeah, I guess. Just how many were tricked this time again? And it sounds like you have a specific person in mind who matches that criteria. Fusaiki-san. That's a weird name. Forget it, you're not even interested, right? Yeah, unless this is Meito talking. Because Meito said that's a weird name. How annoying. Later then. Later. Mi-chan could also be Meito, and not, because she called herself Miya, or Miwa at the end, right? Of course, this conversation wasn't written in any of the church's records. It would be a little while after this that the Black Goat and Sheep would meet again. Insane lordoms? Hopefully it has to do with depth loop. But yeah, it sounds like Meito got a full squad, bro. Became a superpower. Based for all the Meito enjoyers like myself. Anyways, guys, that's the final Etsu story. Next time we'll do a couple bonus stuff. Like we still have some voice stuff. I think we have we still have like the final revelation mode hint at the end that I forgot to do when we ended it because we went straight to the voices. And I believe we're missing, aren't we like missing some gallery stuff? I would probably like Google how to get them, unless we see them now. Or maybe they got filled in. Oh yeah, they got filled in. Never mind, we're not missing anything. It was those two, man, from Mamiya's thing. Okay, just like a really small episode next time, just to finish it off. Not doing it now because it's pretty long already. But thanks for watching as always, and I'll see you next time on the very final episode of Rage and Loop. Then we'll do like a tier list and review. But yeah, until then, later.